Good evening and welcome to Behind the Mic. I'm Jonathan Hodgson, back with you once again for another chat with another great sportscaster. Tonight's guest is KATE Pettersen. KATE is an accomplished TV host, reporter, and a digital producer who's worked at such places as TSN, Sportsnet, the Edmonton Oilers, the Toronto Argonauts, among other places. Pedersen followed her father Leif's footsteps to the CFL, where she was a sideline reporter for TSN, as well as working for MLSE and the Argos. We'll ask KATE about her time in the league and her dad's influence on her life in sports, and we'll go to other places like her time covering the Blue Jays for TSN, as well as reporting on the 2014 Sochi Olympics while she was at CBC. And another passion of KATE's is show jumping and equestrian. We'll get her memories of broadcasting that sport and as well participating in it, and kind of get into a discussion on the different change of pace that sport can bring. And we'll also get into some things on the industry. She's big into the digital side of sports media, so we'll talk about why that is so important and is becoming more important in the industry as time goes on, and other things that she has seen along the way. So we're glad to have you along. Thanks so much. Before we get going, we are going to take one more break here, but before we get going and bring in KATE on the other side of this next break, we will remind you that you can find all of our Behind the Mic archives at astvproductions.com. That's where you can find all of our shows, as well as all the other shows at ASTV and our live game broadcasts. And we simulcast on Facebook as well, and provide updates for all of our shows over on Twitter at Amateur Sports TV. So once again, thanks for tuning us in and spending part of your Friday night with us. I'm Jonathan Hodgson, and on the other side of this break, we will be joined by KATE Pettersen. We'll be back in a moment. And once again, welcome back to Behind the Mic. Jonathan Hodgson here with you, joined now by KATE Pettersen this week. KATE, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Now, where are you joining us from tonight?
I am in the great state of Florida. I'm actually in Wellington, Florida, which is just north of Miami. It's a big horse area, especially during the winter months.
Nice. And we alluded to that in the opening, that's a passion of yours that we'll get into. What is your, of course, it's the topic of conversation for everybody these days, but we'll start with the obvious, just kind of getting into what your last year has looked like with, of course, everybody's lives changing in the last 13 months or so.
My last year has looked nothing like I expected my last year to look like. I was 5 months into my contract with the Oilers when COVID really hit and when everything started to shut down. March 11th was actually my last game. We hosted the Jets at home in Edmonton, and that was the end for me. So I drove back to Toronto and was kind of hanging out there. And a few weeks later, the Oilers actually brought a lot of us back on. So I kind of, went to them and said, I'm already back in Toronto. What should I do? And thankfully, I think the one silver lining of all of this that we've learned in the pandemic is you can do a lot of things remotely, whether it be on Zoom, podcasts, online, everything. There's so much you can do without actually physically being at the rink or involved. So for me, I stayed afloat a little bit longer until the end of the season, or the end of the pause, by being on Zoom, hosting interviews with players who were also scattered all over. So that was pretty great. And then my contract came to an end, and obviously with the circumstances, that was the end of my contract. And I've just kind of been staying afloat with some freelance stuff. And I think the one thing I'm incredibly grateful for at this point is that I've really diversified my skill set. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to stay afloat at this point in time, especially with the fluid situation that, a year ago we thought was going to be over by now, but we know firsthand it's still fluid.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing you said there was in your time when you were finishing up the season with the Oilers was the change to virtual contact with the players as far as interviews and things like that. And we've heard broadcasters talk about their experience with it, and we've seen, of course, the mishaps that can happen that often sometimes lend themselves to a bit of a laugh doing it over Zoom. But from firsthand experience, how much did that change your job as a reporter, trying to get things out of, get quotes from players and kind of get the pulse of a team when you can't actually be there and you just have to ask your 2 questions in a Zoom lineup?
I think that's the biggest challenge. For me, I was interviewing these guys outside of the season because we were in the pause. So it wasn't, heat of the moment. They weren't playing games and things like that. But I think that ultimately is the biggest challenge. It's not the logistics or the technology. When I first moved to Edmonton, and it was really my first experience in the NHL, I walked into the room and there was a part of me that was a little bit stunned about the way in which everything's done, the demeanor of the players, the difference in terms of what I experienced in terms of player access, especially in the CFL versus the NHL. And I actually went to a veteran broadcaster, Jack Michaels, who is now doing the Sportsnet broadcasts out there. And I said, Jack, how do you crack this? I'm used to going in the room and, the guys are happy to see you. And these are guys that have extensive media training and definitely have more of a guard up, in my experience, in the NHL. And he said, go stall to stall. Every opportunity that you have for an extra, and we're talking, you get maybe 2 extra minutes in the room when you're not doing an interview or being in a scrum. He said, go stall to stall, make those relationships. Introduce yourself. I'm Kate. I'm from Toronto. I'm the new reporter. I'm going to be here for the rest of the season. Great to meet you. Maybe there's a connection like Connor McDavid being from near where I am at home, or Ryan Nugent-Hopkins owns racehorses. There's a funny little connection. I ride horses. So things like that, that was the best advice I could have been given, because the difference that it made in the quality of interviews. And also, if you think about, my position as a team reporter versus a network reporter, the host broadcaster, that role is very different from the local news network, right? I think I'm in a bit of a safe bubble as the team reporter because, yes, we want to tell the truth. Yes, we want to tell the stories, but there's an element of safety in that role in terms of what the players expect, that they can trust that you're not out there to kind of sewer them or throw them under the bus. There's always a bit of a positive spin, even if, we're going through a losing streak, it's negative, you've got to mention it. So I think that too, saying I'm Kate, I work for Oilers TV, just already got the trust ball rolling. And I think that, there's an element of safety and security and trust within just that role alone. So that little piece of advice, I think, went a long way. And I noticed that in terms of the players' demeanor and, letting their guards down a little bit, even in a scrum, which is a great thing for me.
Yeah, and something you said there was the difference from going league to league and sport to sport, and the one you brought up was, of course, CFL to the NHL. And you've also done some work covering the Blue Jays. Just how much of a difference is that, or has that been in your perspective? Shifting sports and shifting leagues where often the players can be geared differently, game days can be geared differently. How much of that is a skill in itself to be able to transplant from sport to sport?
I think it's a huge part of it. For me, the covering the Blue Jays, more often than not, I was assigned to the visitors' locker room. So I'm going into the visitors' clubhouse, having never met any of these guys, just a strange face, sticking a microphone in the middle of the scrum, asking questions. So that was probably the biggest challenge, because I would say one of my strengths as a reporter is that I'm personable, that I'm outgoing, that I'm positive, I've got a good energy. And I think that I'm able to draw out personality fairly naturally. Now, some are more guarded than others, so it's a bit of a challenge, and one that I actually enjoy quite a bit. You know, if I make a tough guy laugh, I'm very excited about it afterwards. But yeah, the adapting to different scenarios, different cultures in each team's room as well, right? Not just sport to sport is a big change. And also PR styles. There's a lot of PR people that are a little more lax than, the tight ones. And so I think just it comes down to the same stuff that you want to talk about when you're talking about delivery and your on-camera presence, is just repetitions. The more you do it, there's less firsts, and you start to kind of get over the hump of little things that might make you nervous, and it just becomes a bit more habitual. And I think the less you think when you go into these things, the better the overall product is in terms of what you ask, your delivery on camera, and the answers that you get as well.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll get into some of your fun stories as time goes on here today. But as we talked about right off the opening, was you're down in Florida now, spending time with your horses down there. And am I using the great terminology in saying equestrian?
Equestrian, and more specifically for me, I'm in the world of show jumping.
Show jumping, yeah. And so I wanted to touch on that for a few minutes. And really what strikes me is the experience change that it must be from going from these high intensity, major league sports to a sport that must be geared. The experience of it must be geared so much differently. What do you, and when you were in, say, or around, say, the NHL, Major League Baseball, CFL, what did you get out of the experience of going back into the show jumping world?
It's very different. I think the biggest difference right now, and what I'm most grateful for, is the fact that the revenue is so different in terms of how these different leagues and programs, shows, events operate. In that, for the equestrian world, there hasn't really been a pause because of COVID, because a lot of the revenue is sponsorship, but also entries. So people are paying to compete. And, I'm so grateful for the chance to be down here in Wellington, where there is the only top international competition in the world right now because of COVID. I had 12 full weeks, 3 months of weekly international show jumping with the very best riders in the world. So I think the number one thing right now in my experience is that you really see what drives each league, and not having bums in the seats back at home or in North America when it comes to NFL, NHL, CFL, MLB, all of the above, we've seen how detrimental that is. So I think the beauty of the equestrian sport is, people are here competing and there aren't spectators. So we're very lucky to be able to compete. Now, riding is something I've done my entire life. So for me, I thrive on the opportunity to work in the world of mainstream sports. I love football. I love hockey. I love golf. I love tennis, so many different things. But for me, riding is just something that is so natural to me. So when I'm working these equestrian events, it's almost like I'm on autopilot. And there's such a special aspect to that because I don't even really have to think. I follow it as a fan, and I'm just so passionate about it that I'm kind of just programmed to go with the flow. And we're in the Florida sunshine, so that part is certainly a bonus as well.
That's definitely a plus. And one of your past assignments, you've worked World Cup show jumping on NBC and TSN, and coming from the experience that I personally have from being a baseball play-by-play person, you go through that daily routine of come to the yard, and you hang out on the field for batting practice, talk to players, talk to coaches, get your notes ready. What does kind of take us through a day of covering show jumping, and what does your prep work look like? What does the actual calling of the event look like? Kind of give us a picture of that.
So it is very different and very similar in a lot of aspects. So in terms of preparation, I've always come from the school of being over-prepared is the only way that I do it, really, truly. I spend hours and hours making notes, and I would say 3 to 5% of those notes are used. And I'm sure you feel the same way. You write down all these cool things, little stats, little tidbits, and then a broadcast, it goes by quickly. So your little block of time, all of a sudden it's up and you're like, I didn't even say anything. Or the storyline unfolds in a different way than you could have predicted, and you roll with the punches on that. So in that way, it's similar. I prepare notes on the horse. I prepare notes on the rider, their recent results. And also I talk to some of the organizers. We also have a course designer that sets the track. So it's always good to get a little bit of their insight, because there's always a way to thread it through. If there was a particular area on the course that they thought might pose some challenges for the riders. And also I try to speak to some of the riders. They do get a chance to walk the course beforehand and make their plan. So speaking to them, and again, it all circles back to building those relationships, because there are riders that you can approach before, and ones that are, laser focused and you don't mess with them before. But also ones that are really familiar with you, respect your work, and that you can ask a professional question, hey, what did you think when you walked the course? Was there a difference when you walked it versus when you rode it? And maybe you're not interviewing them live, but if you're able to take that, then when you have your guest on, you can say, I spoke to so-and-so, an Olympic veteran, who thought this worked out differently than when they walked the course. So it didn't really go according to their plan. So I think, the relationship thing is the root of being successful in this business. So that translates. And then the live component is just, it's the same as any other sport, that you've got to really be able to be quick, be on your feet, and be able to fill if you need to. Because of course, if there's unfortunately some sort of accident on course, same with when I was covering ski racing, like there's a big pause, there's a gap, and you've got to fill that. And then also it's quick, right? Someone jumps a clear round and you've got a 30-second break to fit in 2 questions. And so that's what I love. Nothing's ever the same. It's always changing. It's a different, every day is different. And I think that that's what I love the most about being in the field versus being on a desk.
Absolutely. And we have to take our first break here. But on the other side, we'll get into your wealth of experience around the different sports that we alluded to, and dive into some of your better stories, and start to have some fun here on the other side. Thanks for tuning us in. We'll be back after this quick break here on Behind the Mic. I'm Jonathan Hodgson with KATE Pettersen.
Welcome to Pilot Mountain Hockey Academy, your world-class academic and hockey training facility created to maximize each student's athletic and academic potential. Blackjack Stewart Arena, home of the Buffalo, is inside the 46,000 square foot complex, as well as a curling rink and other facilities. The students have a unique combination of successful, well-rounded education at Pilot Mountain Collegiate Institute and the professional hockey training in an encouraging community. The years of experience of on-ice coaching propel our students to the next level, both mentally and physically, in a professional environment.
And once again, welcome back to Behind the Mic here on ASTV Productions. I'm Jonathan Hodgson with you alongside KATE Pettersen this week. Thanks so much, Kate, again for joining us for the show this week. We spent our first block talking a little bit of show jumping as you're coming to us from Florida this week. I wanted to start off our second segment by just kind of setting the background on your sportscasting career before we dive into some of the specifics, and kind of give you a couple of the questions that I give everybody to kind of set the scene. I just kind of give us a kind of a memory of kind of what was your hook to become a sports broadcaster?
Well, not the traditional route for sure, but as I was heading into my fourth year of university at Queen's, I was taking politics, so unrelated to broadcasting. My dad, who was a former professional football player in the CFL, and also a broadcaster for 20-something years on TSN and CTV, passed away suddenly. He had a sudden heart attack. And that was really the moment where, at that point, I was doing a generic major, and I had thought about broadcasting, and I thought about a couple of different options. And that really was the catapult. And that was what shot me into, okay, top gear, let's go, let's figure out a way to get this done. And at that point, also the non-traditional route, because I hadn't gone to school for journalism or taken any sort of media program. So for me, it was like, okay, this is a big jump. I'm 3 years into a degree, so I'm going to finish it. But how am I going to get the reps, get the experience, and get my foot in the door? And that was a very unique journey for sure, challenging and really rewarding in the end, because there were a lot of times where people asked why I was still trying to do it. People just kind of expected you to give up. And I think I have shown over the years a lot of perseverance. And that's something that, even though I'm still digging it out in the trenches, especially because of COVID, it's something I'm very proud of. I've worked at a lot of different networks, and, unlike some 9-to-5 jobs, having a lot of different networks on your resume isn't a bad thing. It's actually a good thing in broadcasting, because it means you're, chipping away and climbing the ladder. So as opposed to some other jobs that might say, why have you moved around so much? This is like, I'm going event to event, Olympic Games to another network, moving and shaking. And to me, that's something that I'm very proud of being able to do.
Was there anybody that, as a sports fan, that you would listen to or that you would watch? And was there anybody that you kind of looked at when you were getting into sportscasting and kind of saying, yeah, I'd kind of like to do something like that, or approach your career the way a certain person did? Was there anybody that you listened to as a fan and kind of looked up to as a pro?
For sure. I think the one thing that was very special about my childhood was that I was kind of in with the old boys because I'd be in the broadcast booth with my dad. So there are so many incredibly talented broadcasters in Canada that I'm able to call on as friends, mentors, etc. In terms of what I actually watched and followed quite religiously, it was actually Off the Record with Michael Landsberg. And I think I went to his show, I want to say 3 or 4 times, like a bit overkill for career day. I could have maybe shadowed someone else, but I always had so much fun going to the studio and watching. And I think it's funny that you asked that, and I probably haven't spoken about Off the Record or Michael in quite some time, but to look back on what I just said in the first segment and what I would say was the biggest thing I learned from watching him is that relationships, the stuff that Michael could do and the way that he could draw personality out of people and the way he just conducted interviews so effortlessly on the show, I think is something that really drew me to what he was able to do. It was showing, and now we've seen a lot of the shows evolve to be a little bit more relaxed instead of, your cookie cutter sports news delivery. There's a lot more personality, but I think that in terms of in Canada, Michael Landsberg and Off the Record really trailblazed that style, and there was something special about it. And then, a little bit unrelated to broadcast, but just as a sports mentor, I feel really privileged to have Michael Pinball Clemens in my life as a close friend of my dad's and someone that, he brightens up any room he's in and just has this innate way of making every single person he interacts with feel special. And so I think in a lot of ways, I look up to him just as a person, but also as a sports role model in general, not necessarily just as an athlete, because I had the chance to work with him when he was in different front office roles and on the football operations side as well in my time in the CFL. So those would be 2 Canadians I really look up to. And on the broadcast side, as a female, Sarah Orlesky is top class, extremely great on air, but an even better mentor and friend as well. So she took me under her wing in the CFL, and I'm always forever grateful. And I think she's just a wonderful person and incredibly talented and knowledgeable as well.
And I have to get in here that the reason that you and I were able to connect was you spent a little bit of time on the news desk in Regina on Global TV. And it was there where Rob Cherepushak was the head coach of the Regina Red Sox, Western Canadian Baseball League team. And he and I became pretty good friends from across the field. I was working in the league for the Okotoks Dogs. They beat us in the final, which I've forgiven him for. And we've become really good friends after we've kind of moved into our next chapters. And your name immediately came up with him when I started this show, talking to sportscasters. I was kind of curious. Did you have a chance? I believe you were on the desk. Did you have a chance to get out to Red Sox games and cover the sports scene in Regina while you were there?
Yeah, so actually I was doing news, so trying to break into the sports world while I was out there. So on the side, I was actually the in-stadium host for the Red Sox. So I did all of the promos. I did some of the on-field hosting when they had, games, and I did the 7th inning stretch and all of that. So, that was a great way. I think in Regina, the biggest thing was the people are so incredible and the sports fans are so passionate. And it was a really, really great place to start my career, because my dad started his career for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So there was that element of, I'd lost my dad. And so for me, both of us started our careers in Regina. So that was pretty cool. And then to be able to be at the ballpark on a summer night, you know what it's like, especially out in the prairies. I mean, it was beautiful. And the biggest thing that I gained from being around the Red Sox was just the people and the friends I made, and people like you mentioned, like Rob, who, texts me every Christmas and every so often just, hey, me and my family, we're all thinking of you and we hope you're doing well. And then the beauty of social media is that, even through a pandemic and through crazy work schedules and different time zones, there's a little element of being able to stay in touch even without interacting with someone. So it's kind of nice to be able to follow everyone, and some of the kids that I met at the games are now, not kids anymore, but I'm able to stay in touch. And I think that's really special. And what the Red Sox had when I was there was incredibly special. And I'm very grateful that they gave me that opportunity.
And then from there, you spent some time with Sportsnet as a broadcast associate, doing a lot of behind the camera type work with editors, with writers, and you can fill in the details. But I always find it interesting to ask about the value of that behind the camera work, and how much that benefits you going forward, having that experience working on all the other elements of a show.
Yeah, the experience I had in Regina was fantastic. Obviously, my passion is sports. So that was a really great building block in learning the ropes of broadcast media and, trying to understand storytelling and the protocols of a newsroom and sort of what your day looks like there. And then I got the opportunity to move home to take a behind the scenes role. And I just thought in the moment, I wanted to be back closer to the rest of my family as well. I knew that at the time, it's pretty easy to figure out a landscape at a smaller network in terms of, where I would be in the hierarchy in terms of getting a sports job. And I was quite a ways down based on the interest of the other broadcasters. So I took the role, and in the moment, of course, I wanted to be on air, but it taught me how to write. It taught me how to write for sports. It helped me understand, the layout, the breakdown of the show. Part of that role was actually running prompter for the anchors. So I was in there, immersed in it, and also being challenged with sports I'd never covered, like having to cut a pack for a NASCAR race. That's not in my wheelhouse, or wasn't. Now I know, I'm Googling pole position, being like, please don't anyone catch me, that I have no idea what that means. And so I think that was great in that, you were forced to learn a lot of different things. And when you're first there, they give you less impactful games. Maybe your game doesn't even make the show, but you go through the whole thing. And then it was really great to sit down with your supervisor at the end of every shift, go through your pack, they give you feedback. And, it was a really good hands-on learning experience. And in the moment, I had no idea what was coming down the road. But, fast forward to the 2014 Olympics, and that's when I was sort of poached by CBC from Sportsnet to be a lead writer. So I went from all this broadcast media to, hey, you're going to write, and you're going to write a lot and every single day. And I remember my first day at CBC, I sat down next to Mike Brophy. Mike Brophy has written books. Mike was writing about hockey. Mike's written full books. And I'm sitting there going, wow, we are in line. We are the same position for different sports. And let me say it again, he's written books. So, I'm kind of going, wow, they hired me. And I know a lot of that was because of my depth of knowledge in freestyle skiing and snowboarding. And also, again, relationships with the athletes, because I grew up skiing and snowboarding and I had built some of those relationships. But wow, I mean, what an honor to get that role. But how grateful was I that I had spent the last however many months tweaking my writing style and, immersing myself in the ability to write punchy things and, write a 30-second pack that covers an entire game in 30 seconds. So, it's crazy to think back now. In the moment, I was like, oh, I really want to be on air. But what a foundation I got from that. Yeah, I don't even know. Was it 12 months or so? I'd have to check my own resume. But, what an opportunity. Really cool to look back, and hindsight's 2020, but I'm really glad I made that move.
I love that. And of course, we'll head back to the CFL, as that was part of your next step from CBC, then on to TSN, where you were a part of CFL broadcasts, I believe, on TV and radio sides. You can correct me if I'm mistaken on that.
I did radio for TSN, and I was on the digital for the team.
There we go. And so what was and of course you've referenced, of course, your dad has had a huge history in the league. Played for 8 seasons, split between the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Hamilton Tiger Cats, and then a long, accomplished broadcast career. Much of it at TSN. He was a former partner of Rod Black, who is still hosting their panel, and it still blows me away to say it, but he's a friend of this show and somebody we've had on, and somebody that I have the opportunity to speak to. So that just blows me away to have Rod. But when you made the move to TSN and had a chance to get back into the league, what was that? Was there significance to that moment for you, being back involved around the league that your dad was a part of for so long?
Absolutely. I think I need to add a little tidbit into that story, because there is a great connection, and I think it kind of speaks to my career journey, is that when all of that happened, when I ended up getting the role at TSN, I was actually working. I went from CBC and I did a quick 6-month stint at the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation. And so at the time, I had lost my dad suddenly in 2008. And 6 months later, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She was given 2 months to live, and she lived a lot longer than that. And that was thanks to the work of the doctors and the medical team at Princess Margaret. So when I finished my contract at CBC, and as often happens with Olympics, there's a downtime in between games, and you're on a short contract. So when I finished there, I was looking for work, and they were looking for a forever social and digital person, but needed sort of a Band-Aid. And I said, I can be your Band-Aid. That'll help me stay busy while I'm looking for something else. So I was in the boardroom when I got the phone call at Princess Margaret, a hospital that I have such great ties to now. So for me, there was like a little extra special, because, I got to sit there and call my mom, and the only reason my mom was still there was thanks to this hospital. So a bit of a side wine to get you back to this point. But for me, I just sat in that boardroom when TSN called, and I just remember being like, wow, this is just, my entire life. This has been my dream is to be a sideline reporter in the CFL. So I had a little cry, and that was a really special moment. And also I was in a place where, they knew my time was going to be short with them. So everyone was obviously very thrilled. And yeah, just to be there, I did my first game was a preseason game at Varsity Stadium. And I think still to this day, there are so many moments in my career where I get in the car after a broadcast and I just, the waterworks come. And yeah, of course they're sad tears, but I think there's an element of happiness and pride mixed in. So I did post, I remember posting on Instagram a photo after that game at Varsity, with a photo of my dad, his like TSN headshot, and then me on the sidelines. And so, yeah, it is just incredible to think that finally happened. And I did it for a number of years. And there were moments every season that there was something special. And I think too, when we talk about the CFL, I think the most special part is the unique Canadian aspect, but most importantly, the Canadian fans. They are special. And I could go on for days about my interactions with fans. And I think for me too, is when I'm at a Grey Cup and, Saskatchewan fans or Hamilton fans or just longtime fans of the league recognize you and come up to you with a story about my dad. I mean, I can't even, it makes me emotional because it's just so special, and I can't tell you the number of times where someone has been at a Grey Cup party wearing a Pedersen jersey and I turn them around and I'm like, oh, no, it's not Pedersen. Shoot, it's Bobby Pedersen. But anyway, it's just, to be able to follow in his footsteps and really do something he did is pretty remarkable for me. And the CFL is something I grew up being a fan of. So how cool is it that now all the old boys that I watched play are coaching or in management positions or, anytime I see Winnipeg and Mike O'Shea, I'm like, oh, I remember watching O'Shea on the field, cool.
Absolutely. And our last point before we head to our next break was I wanted to touch on the 2017 Toronto Argos and their Grey Cup win. You've spent some time working for MLSE and the Argos. Were you around for that Grey Cup season in 17?
Yes, I have a ring. My dad would be rolling over upstairs because he came very close. If you remember the catch way back in the day, Tony Gabriel, that was one that my dad lost. He played into and lost. But yes, so I worked for the team throughout the season. And then about a week before Grey Cup, I got a call from Mike Whittingham, who is out in British Columbia, and he does the national broadcast for Grey Cup. And the way things go in the hierarchy is that once you get to Grey Cup, you have the regular TV team does the TV, but then sort of like the second TV team then calls the game. And so then our call guys would get bumped down to radio sidelines. So as a result, Mike Hogan was doing the radio broadcast on the Argos sidelines, and I was left out. But Calgary doesn't have a TSN radio network. So when Calgary got in, Mike called and said, hey, would you like to do the Stamp sideline? And that was another oh my gosh moment because it was my first Grey Cup. And I think for me, everyone goes to Grey Cup and parties. For me, I was locked in the hotel room. I was reading notes. I was studying depth charts, especially because it's also a new team for me and a Western team. So we don't see them as much and you don't see the games as much because I go to bed at 9:00. So that was hard, but I studied like crazy. And I think just the emotion that built up, I had a couple of big cries in my room because it was one of those, I wish my dad could be here. And for me, it's funny that you brought up the one guy that I have to mention. And I'm not surprised he's a friend of the show because he truly is an incredible human through and through. But Rod Black, talk about a crazy moment. My first Grey Cup, my first hit on the sidelines, and Rod Black, my dad's partner for all those years, threw down to me. And I had to kind of like check myself in the moment because he was like, and now we'll send things down to the sidelines to our sideline reporter, KATE Pettersen. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I took a breath and I did my hit, and thankfully it was good. But for me, like, wow. And then again, I left the game and I just thought, wow, if my dad was alive, we could have done a game together. There was a very good chance that had happened. So, it was incredibly special. And then the Argos won. They were the team that I was working for all year. So I was on the mic to Mike, who was up in the booth, and I said, do you need me to jump in? Do you need me to help with, because things get crazy after the game? And he said, yeah, grab anyone you can. So it was like Hoagie, KATE across the field. But I was the one that got closest to Ricky Ray. So I grabbed him and I got to ask him, the retirement question, which he kind of snuck around in the moment. But wow, what a Grey Cup experience. And then, kudos to the team with the Argos, Jim Pop and all of the management for including me in the ring ceremony. And that was pretty special. And I got my dad's 71 put on the ring. So it's I will cherish forever.
Very nice. That's fantastic. We have to take our next break here on Behind the Mic. We'll be back with one more segment with a little bit more shop talk here with KATE Pettersen on Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions. And once again, welcome back to Behind the Mic here on ASTV Productions. Jonathan Hodgson in conversation with KATE Pettersen, and it's been a fantastic show so far, talking about a range of things. Finished up on a great note in our last block, talking about your time in the CFL and winning a Grey Cup ring with the Argos. And I wanted to just really quickly finish up on that train of thought, because you've brought up a couple of things here today that come back to it, and I wanted to ask you about the differences when you're working for a club as opposed to working in the media, because you've worked for the Argos. And of course, earlier we talked about your time working for the Edmonton Oilers. So how does that change things when you're covering from the perspective of a club versus for a media network?
Well, in my career, I've had the luxury of seeing it from what I would say is all three sides, in that you can be the team reporter, the host broadcaster, or then a member of the media that is not the host broadcaster. So when I did the Blue Jays, I worked for TSN, but Sportsnet has the rights. When I worked for TSN doing the CFL, they had the rights, and then also for the team. So I think the biggest thing on that scale is access. And I think that in itself kind of gives you your parameters and a bit of your lane in terms of what you're able to do, and a bit more in terms of your direction, because, there's a newsy angle. But I spoke with John Shannon actually when I was with the Oilers. he was kind of in there consulting and helping us as a talent coach. And he said, if people want stats, Kate, they can go to the Score app, TSN, Sportsnet, all of the apps. They don't need you to stand on camera and spit out stats. Now, if a stat supports something that you're saying or really gives some depth to a storyline, sure, that makes sense. But he said, you're the inside source as someone who's with the team. You've got to give the fans what they can't see on Sportsnet or on the local news channel or wherever. So I think that was a really great piece of advice. And I think that that's actually what I like most, and why I would say, if I had the chance, I know a lot of people think, if you're not on TV, you don't have the same clout. I love the digital space. I love it because you can be so much more creative. And I think for me personally, that's my strength. I'm creative. I love to push boundaries. And especially, we talk about hockey players having their guards up. One of my proudest pieces with the Oilers was my series on Movember and talking about mustaches. And, you got to see them laughing. And I remember Mike Smith came up with like 100 different names. It was like Cookie Duster, Muzzy, the list goes on. And we had so much fun shooting that piece. And, the season gets serious and the hockey is serious. And so I love that there was an opportunity to have a little bit of fun. Obviously, between the CFL and the NHL, there's a little bit of a different persona and character in the players. And with the CFL, there was a lot more time in between games to have that fun. So it was different. So I think for me personally, I like the team side because it's more of that lighthearted storytelling, even though, the sports IQ still has to be there and it has to be timely and it has to make sense in terms of the actual hockey product or football product. But I think that's a cool way to be involved. And then, of course, the broadcast stuff, I live for football and I live for hockey and I live for all those sports. So I wouldn't shy away from any of the jobs. But the team reporter is very unique in that personable aspect.
Absolutely. And with all the different angles you've been able to see the different sports from in the past 10 years or so, what are some of the changes in the sports media industry that have stood out to you? And are there some of those changes that you would like to continue to see develop?
I think the two that I would say stand out the most to me, and this is from, I've now been in the business for 11 years, since the Vancouver Olympics in 2010 as an intern. I think number one is that you can't do one thing. I think, there's probably a handful of people that have been in the game long enough that can still kind of be in that role where, they're handed a script, they host, they're told what to do, etc. But now it's just evolved to be so diverse that you can't just walk in and say, I'm on air, or I shoot, or I produce. No, you have to be able to do everything. When I was in Edmonton, I cut every single pack myself. So someone shot it, and then we'd be in the locker room doing our scrums, quickly out to the bench, shoot my stand-ups, run, because they wouldn't leave a player, but they would leave us on the bus. And, everyone's enjoying, celebrating a win. We're sitting on the plane, everyone's eating their meal, whatever. I'm sitting there editing frantically because I've got to upload my pack before we take off. So I think the biggest difference there is that you have to be able to do so much. And I think that's where my unique pathway to this point is very beneficial, because, for example, here in Florida, I'm doing a lot more writing than I've ever done. And that's just because I'm working for a Canadian company and they want written content about the Canadian athletes down here. So I'm able to stay afloat in my freelance business because I have the writing skills. And I wasn't doing any writing in Edmonton. So, short time, big change. So I think it's ever evolving in that way. But I think also too, the cool part is the way that the digital landscape has shifted. And I think we learned that in COVID with the amount of Zoom calls and the creative ways to engage fans, despite the fans not being able to be there. So I think the evolution of digital media and social and just the way in which you're able to interact with players, and I say that as a fan of sports, I think is really, really neat. I think that's a really cool change, and I think it will continue to be like that. Of course, I hope we can have the physical access, but I think it's really neat how people have adapted. I think we've learned a lot about what we're capable of, and I think it provides just supplement to the reason we all love what we love. We love the game. We love watching the game. But how cool is it to get the behind the scenes access that we get to supplement our passion for the game and the actual product on the field or the ice?
Yeah, for sure. And would that be a big part of your advice if you were to speak to somebody who's just starting out in the sports broadcasting or sports media industry about being adaptable and being willing and being excited to try different things? Is that kind of how it has to be now for people just getting into it, is to be adaptable and try all different kinds of things?
Absolutely. I think there are no jobs now that are just one thing, or maybe, a few, but very far and few between. And I think that the worst thing someone could do is pigeonhole themselves if they want to grow and continue in the business by saying, I only do this. I think also by doing the other things, we talked about it with my transition from Sportsnet to CBC, by doing the other things, you just become better in everything you do. I don't think that my on-camera delivery evolved purely because I was on camera. I also became better at writing, and I wrote stronger scripts, and I learned how to write for speaking versus writing, to make it conversational, using conversational language. If you're reading off a prompter, makes a massive difference to your delivery. So 1000%, I think for anyone who wants to get in the business, the more versatile you can be, the more doors you're going to be able to open. And we know it's a very competitive field. It's cutthroat. You've got to hustle. You've got to grind. And it's certainly who you know. But I think if you position yourself as a team player, a pinch hitter, someone who really wants to be a part of it in any capacity, you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we start to wind down, we've talked about a lot of your different experiences and some of the cool moments and opportunities that you've had. As you look at what you've been able to do so far in your career, what are you most proud of?
Overall, I think I'm proud of my tenacity and the hustle, because there have been moments, and you could call the current today a moment, because moving to Edmonton was a huge jump in my career and one that I was so passionate about and proud of. And I only got 5 months, and it came to a screeching halt because of obviously something much bigger than me. But I think, I could certainly apply my skills to something else like marketing, event planning. There's a lot of things where my energetic personality would kind of carry me well in a role like that, but I don't want to. And I think I said it in a job interview maybe 2 years ago. Someone said, well, why do you want to do it? And I said, because when I'm standing on the sidelines or at a rink on a Saturday night, I'm not thinking about what my friends are doing or what party I'm missing or what I could be doing. I'm thinking, wow, how lucky am I to be standing here doing something I really love? So I think I'm most proud being able to roll with the punches and to be able to grind, because it hasn't been easy, and it still isn't easy. But I absolutely love it. So, one good broadcast back in the groove, and, you got the bug again. So I'm proud of that. And I'm also proud of being able to carry on my dad's legacy, because, obviously I miss him a lot. My mom was so supportive of my career. And now I've lost her as well. So I miss her a lot. And I'm proud that I think my parents would be proud as well. And that means a lot to me.
For sure. So as you look forward, I know you talked about your freelance work right now. If you were to look into the future, what goals remain for you, and have there been new goals that have come up for you? What do you think lies ahead?
I have no idea, other than 14 days of quarantine once I cross the border in 2 weeks. But I'm trying to get as much golf in as I can before that happens. But for the future, for me, at least in the short term, would be NFL or NHL. The NFL has always been my dream. I know I've had so many incredible experiences in the CFL, and I think just being able to open a door to the NFL, and there are a lot more doors to open down here, I think would be something I really, really want to try. And actually, the one thing I've thought about is the ability to jump into some golf broadcasts. I wouldn't mind that. Maybe it would help my game. I don't know. Nothing seems to be working right now. But I think for the short term, my goal is to get back to doing what I love, and that's, being a digital host and being on air consistently. And maybe there is some production to that as well, because I did really enjoy the aspect at the Oilers, being able to be the full conductor of my own program in that.
So if anybody out there wants to see more of your work and wants to connect with you on Twitter, where can people find your stuff, and where can we connect with you?
Well, it's katepettersen.com, and also on Instagram, I'm KatePettersen_. And at this point in time, I feel like I don't have a lot to tweet about day to day. So I would say Instagram is where you can keep up with me. I've been called the activity queen a time or two. So I like to fill my days with as much as I can right now. So there's always something going on Instagram.
Sounds great. Kate, once again, thanks so much for doing this. I know, like we mentioned before, it was a mutual friend contact that put us in touch, and you were gracious enough to give me an immediate yes to coming on and doing this. So once again, thanks so much for the time and for the conversation. Really, really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you for having me. And hi, Rob. Thanks for connecting us.
That's Coach C for me. But thanks so much. And we're gonna say goodbye to Kate and head to one more break. And I'll be right back on the other side, and we'll wrap up this show here for another week and get you set for next week here on Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions. And once again, welcome back one more time to Behind the Mic on ASTV Productions. Jonathan Hodgson here to wrap up another week. Just finished with our chat with Kate Pedersen. It was a great hour with Kate, talking about her career and her life in sports. A lot of a lot of talk about her history with the CFL, from working in the CFL, calling games with TSN, working for the Argos, and of course her dad Leif having a great career as a player and broadcaster, and some of her insights to seeing sports from different vantage points, and where the sportscasting industry is heading. So once again, thanks so much to Kate for joining us this week. We really appreciate it. The archive will be up at astvproductions.com shortly, and that's where you can find all of our archives from every show we've done. And there you can also find all of our other shows and live broadcasts on astvproductions.com. We simulcast on Facebook, and you can also find our updates on Twitter. Every week, we try to post our guest reveals for Behind the Mic, so you can keep tuned in to Facebook and Twitter for our guest reveals early every week. And then, of course, the show, same time, same place, every week, Friday, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, as we have another chat next week with another great sportscaster. Until next Friday, thanks so much for spending part of your Friday night with us. I'm Jonathan Hodgson. For my guest, KATE Pettersen, thanks for watching, and we will talk to you again next week.